Welcome along to Live On Air tonight. We're streaming live on Facebook and also YouTube as well. I'm Stuart McAdam and this is David Bell with me, and we're here tonight to discuss creativity and how it's been used to spread and grow and develop the Christian message. From classic thinkers like C.S. Lewis and Martin Luther to more contemporary figures like William Lane Craig and Alvin Plantinga, creativity has always been a vital part of the Christian message. And whether you are a Sunday church attender or a very committed theologian, we'd love to get your input in the Facebook comments section and also in the YouTube comments as well. Feel free to punch any questions or comments you have into the boxes there. It'd be much appreciated. David, you've obviously done quite a bit of work with both as a minister and a theologian as well. Just give us a bit of background as to how you've used creativity in your time.
Oh, thanks for asking that, Stuart. I've been involved with creative writing in terms of writing prayers and sermons and reflections for Christian congregations for 38 years now. And it's talking basically about creativity with words, but of course with the influx of social media in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a huge swing around to being creative with images, with videos, 360-degree cameras and all this kind of thing. And you sort of wonder, can Christianity compete? Does it have the ability to be creative when there's so much creativity out there in the world? And the short answer is yes. And believe me, some of the thinkers that we're just going to briefly touch on this evening have the most amazing insights into what the world of the imagination can do and be, and how it can enliven our spiritual thinking.
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good point that you made, David, and very good overview, I think. Tell us about some of those thinkers that that come to mind when you sort of think about creativity.
Okay, I think the first one that I'd like to talk about, Stuart, is Rabindranath Tagore, and he talked about an elusive kingdom, and it wasn't so much that he was writing about Christianity, but spirituality in general. And there are many ways to the kingdom of heaven, but Tagore's insight was profoundly simple, and what he did was simply ask nature something about this elusive inner kingdom that human beings placed within the context of nature have to find. And he said this, and I like it very much indeed. I asked the tree, speak to me of God, and it blossomed. Now, that's a simple insight, and we've simply made a little video recording that particular insight. That's one way that I think we can say, yeah, there's something going on here.
That's a very good point that you made there, David. And the other thing that really seems to strike out as well is the discussion of and the use of figurative language as well. And you've picked out a couple of verses from the Bible which talk about that.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I think it's the book of Psalms that really stands out. Bible Society has said for many, many years that Psalms is one of the most popular books of both Old and New Testaments. The Psalms talk about very difficult times, very hard times for people. And in the Psalms there can be enormous blessings and at the same time curses, because the Psalms say some terribly almost wicked things about God. And so how does that help our current search for spirituality? Well, it's true that sometimes the people that wrote the Psalms mistook their own outrage at the hard times in life, the times when there was violence and cruelty and all the things that can possibly go wrong did go wrong. They mistook their motives for God's motives. And I think that's a perfectly human thing to do. But when they were looking for the blessings that there are still always there within the hard times, they had a kind of affirmation that actually this is the way life is. Life isn't structured in such a way as to have no evil in it. Life isn't structured in such a way that there can't be times of nature's cruelty and times of man's inhumanity to man, if I can use that expression, man. All of these things happen, but the psalmists at their best say, yeah, we can find the hand of God in this, and it's a hand that is worth knowing.
Well put, David. Very well put. And I think one big takeaway from the Psalms in particular is God talking to us through and using and metaphors being used in order for us to truly understand and grasp the concept of human nature. Because a lot of the times if you talk about the concept of love, when you see it in poetry, when you see it talked about in the Bible, there's no such mention of chemicals racing around in your brain. It's discussions of, love is patient, love is kind, it does not boast. But going over into the next point which we're talking about is the sixth sense, which is the creativity sense, a very important part of it. C.S. Lewis used it very well in his books, The Chronicles of Narnia. What are some times where you've really noticed Christian creativity really standing out, either in apologetics or just in contemporary settings?
Wow, thanks for that question, Stuart, because I believe that this is something that is a unique Methodist insight that was put forward by John Wesley, the guy that started the Methodist Church in the 18th century. And he said he believed that in addition to our normal five senses, and I know that today's psychologists say that we've got more than five senses, there are a number of extra senses in there. But if we just take it as a sort of a basic set of senses that measure things, Wesley said, well, the human being is constructed in such a way that somehow faith is a component of virtually everything that humans do. And he went so far as to say that faith was the sixth sense, and it was the sixth sense that operated in the good times and in the hard times. So the sixth sense could be, I guess, likened to a world of experience that's open to the imagination that the animal kingdom has, that the kingdom of human beings used to have but have gradually lost. And Wesley believed that Christian faith in particular opened a way to rationally talk about things that we don't normally talk about.
And that sort of carries us over to the next thing we're going to talk about now, David, which is values. Now, a lot of people have different definitions and different types of values. Just explain a bit more as to where you see values fitting in from a creative perspective and also as well a Christian perspective.
Well, Stuart, you and I both are agreed that values matter enormously in our society because values seem to be diminishing. As the world grows more and more complex, it's hard to see some really strong values standing out anymore. And those values that you mentioned earlier, love, compassion, kindness, etc., along with the psalmist's ability to find blessing in the midst of the cursing, all of these are about finding and creating principles by which people can live. And I think if we are very, very sure that values matter, if we are sure that we can find an ethic to live by, then the world is going to be a better place and we're going to be better human beings from being born through all the stages until we die. And I think there are 12 great moral principles that have always been there. Moses gave the 10 Commandments, and Aristotle said that human beings are social animals, live by the golden rule. Jesus insisted there were only 2 great commandments, all the others flowed from those 2. Luther said, from the voice of conscience, here I stand and can do no other. The Jewish philosopher Spinoza argued that God could only be known through the laws of nature, and Shakespeare said that the quality of mercy is not strained. Those are all values that matter. I could also mention that Kant formulated a wonderful ethical principle. He said we're to live our lives as if every act was to be a universal law. And so people who are searching for, how do I behave ethically, how do I behave morally today, if the thing you do could be applied to everyone, then surely it's worth doing. If it can't be applied to everyone, well, maybe you need to think again. John Wesley, of course, had his famous saying about doing all the good that you can and all the ways that you can, etc. And in the 19th century, the philosopher Kierkegaard did say that truth is subjective, it's personal, and it has to be lived out. That means your personal values matter. And so I think even the environmental activists, the movements similar to Greenpeace, that kind of thing, they have a belief that the environment matters, the world is a living thing, everything is interconnected. There was a wonderful phrase they had towards the end of the 20th century, and that was, think globally, act locally. And to me, all of those, I really wanted to get them all in. The little video series that this is in has all of them, but they're a wonderful set of principles, I think, that we need to live by.
Very, very much so. And another thing which is also a big part of, I guess, the whole process of creativity and developing and putting all of these things together is being able to communicate it, each of these things in a way that's understandable to people, whatever their background might be. And one of the big things which Jesus used was parables. And could you just expand a little bit more on why they were so effective, David?
Well, the parables are effective, Stuart, because sometimes they are wickedly funny. They're always, well, not always, but often they're putting a sort of a David and Goliath type situation together. And because of that, Jesus' original audiences would have laughed out loud. And it's the kind of mirth of God amidst all the things that do go wrong in life. It's the mirth of God, perhaps, that's one of the least undervalued aspects of imagination and Christian spirituality. The mirth of God was a topic that was explored very, very well by the writer G.K. Chesterton. And if you've ever read any of the Father Brown stories, the detective of the, I think it was the 1920s, 30s, I could be wrong about that, they were marvellous insights into the pastoral life and the little things that can happen that can be so funny. And actually, that's what a congregation is like. It's like a whole series of little things where lots of funny things happen, humorous things, and at the same time, people, they go through all the stages of life. There's baptisms of children and confirmations of teenagers and all the experiences that go on in adulthood up to the point where people die. All of this somehow can be part of the mirth of God. And if our lives can be lived with that kind of mirth, I think that's really worth doing. And
that weaves nicely into the next thing that we're going to talk about, which is a fair and just society.
Well, a fair and just society, that really is a major, major topic in terms of ethics and moral values. And it was the American philosopher John Rawls who formulated the idea of what he called the original position. And in a nutshell, it's this. Look, why don't you make up the rules of how you think society should govern itself? And you get a group of people and they're all able to put down what they think society should look like, what makes for fair, just, equitable kind of society. And then John Rawls added this extra dimension. He said, but you, when you formulate your rules, do not know what position you will occupy in society. And of course that changes the whole dynamic of the game. So the video explores that in a slightly deeper way, but that's certainly what the fair and just society is about.
And that brings us to the next section, sinners or saints. I've actually come to the end of a really interesting book about a leader of the South African Communist Party in the apartheid days, Chris Hani. And him and a lot of people in the African National Congress were fighting against the apartheid regime, who saw them as, what would be known as complete sinners, whereas they saw themselves as the sort of like saints and freedom fighters. So it's quite interesting when you have a look at those different perspectives and how to distinguish out what is right and wrong. What's your experience of all of that, David?
Well, I've got no experience of the apartheid regime in South Africa, but what I can say is that the debate about moral and ethical issues around such things that you're talking about has been there in Christianity since it began. And St. Paul had an extensive understanding of what constitutes sin. Now, sin isn't a very popular word. I think the Reconciliation Committee, was it the Committee for Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa? They understood pretty well what sin was, but you'll find in, say, a lot of liberal thinking, and I mean, I'm a liberal sort of thinker in some ways, but in a lot of liberal thinking, that doesn't sit comfortably with the concept of sin and sinners. Yet I'd want to say that actually the deepest roots of being human mean that we can and we do make mistakes all the time. Most of the time in our society, these don't lead to consequences of harm for other people. But when societies as a whole go wrong, then there can be enormous harm committed. But whether it's the individual or whether it's a society, nevertheless, people can and do easily get estranged from God. And if they're estranged from God, well, that's actually what the Bible meant by sin, not having God with you. And I think it's terribly important to have a notion of God. So many people want to do away with the notion of God. They think it's old-fashioned. They think it doesn't mean anything. They somehow believe that science has disproved it. No, that's not the case at all. Actually, without the notion of God and the idea of universal ethical and moral principles, it's possible for humans to do the most awful things, all in the name of, well, we could, we could make our own ethic as we went along.
Because it's easier to justify it, is that right?
There's no justification required, is there? In fact, this is one of the great theological arguments. Is there a God? And it's part of the argument about, well, why is there moral evil in the world? And the answer is, I think from a Christian perspective, and I think from a very human perspective, the answer is that if we lose the capacity to think about God and have God with us, we lose the capacity for moral and ethical judgment. Now, I'm not saying you've got to be a Christian to do that. I think that moral and ethical judgments can proceed from any religion. They can proceed from atheism and agnosticism, but it's a lot harder. And people say, well, if you look at all the harm that the church has done in the over the centuries, I'd remind you that people like Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot and all of the regimes of the world, all of those things that have caused huge suffering haven't been done in the name of the Christian church.
All right, and I think with that brings to a conclusion what we've been talking about tonight. Thank you very much for your time, David. Very good getting your thoughts and perspective on those things. And thank you very much to everyone that tuned in to watch us, both on YouTube and on Facebook. We look forward to doing many more videos like this, and we thank you very much for your time. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Stuart. And the parting thought I'd leave is our last little video is on Kagawa, the great Japanese Christian thinker. And he was writing from prison, and what he said was, "The whole universe is mine. God threw it in when he gave me Christ."
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.